Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Stringer and welcome to episode 12 of the 11FS Newsroom. So in this weekly show, we take a deep dive into the biggest news stories of the week just gone. And don't forget to give us a follow on LinkedIn so you can never miss an episode. So apart from our live shows, we also love making podcasts at 11FS. So if you haven't checked out the podcast InsurTech Insider, then you're definitely missing out. We've published some of our best ever episodes over the last few months. From the future of work to the biggest industry InsurTech events. There's a topic in there for everyone who wants to keep their finger on the pulse of the industry. So head over to ii.11fs.com to start listening, or just search for InsurTech Insider on your podcast provider. Okay, so today we're talking about the UK government beginning urgent talks to try and reach an agreement by March 2021 on the future of the UK's access to the EU financial markets. City Minister John Glenn and Senior Treasury Civil Servant Catherine Braddock will lead the talks for the UK, and the aim is to forge a memorandum of understanding about the future financial services access. So in order to talk more about this and to get an understanding of the importance of this deal, please join me in welcoming Ayanna Vidal, Head of Policy and Government Affairs at Innovate Finance. Ayanna, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Mel?
I'm great, thank you. So I won't ask you where you are or where you're dialing in from, because I know that it's probably from home. I can see your lovely plants in the background.
Yeah, so started the new year with a bang. If anyone else is tuning in from the East London, you might have heard at lunchtime a sonic boom that shook my flat. It turned out it was an RAF plane, which I followed on Twitter. So if anyone else heard that, that's what it was.
Okay, so just before we start, Ayanna, Innovate Finance runs the Women in Financial Power List nominations. Can you tell us a bit more about this and how the audience can nominate candidates?
Yeah, so Innovate Finance runs the Women in FinTech Power List. It is an annual celebration of the work and achievements of women working in the sector and driving change and innovation. So I don't know about you, but I think everyone needs a good news story at this point in time. And it's definitely a nice way to start the year. I'm very aware, because I've been working with a number of fantastic women over the last 12 months on COVID and everything that fintech firms have been doing to pivot and respond to that. So I know that a lot of good work is happening, and this is just basically a shout out to wonderful women to put themselves forward, or to their wonderful male colleagues to nominate them to be a part of the Power List. We have nominations open until the end of the week, Friday, 15th of January. And we have 7 categories, everything from policy to technical expertise to comms, marketing, investment. So please do take a look. You can find it at innovatefinance.com/Women in FinTech Power List 2020. You can also Google it, and I'm sure hopefully it will be first in your Google search. But please do take a look and nominate yourselves before Friday.
Awesome, thank you. I definitely have a few women that I think I could nominate for sure. All right, so we love getting your questions on the show, and you can leave them in the comments sidebar, and we can answer. We'll hope to be able to answer them live for you. Depends if you give us any curveballs or not. All right, so Ayanna, just start by introducing yourselves and what you do at Innovate Finance, please.
So I am Head of Policy and Government Affairs at Innovate Finance, which means I lead our influencing and engagement work with government, with regulators, and basically hopefully try to get the industry behind some core asks to influence policy and regulation for the benefit of the sector.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So first question from me is in your opinion, how important is this? How important is it to reach an agreement with the EU for the UK fintech? So we've got the Brexit deal sort of sorted out, but how important is it on the financial services side to reach an agreement?
So it's really interesting, because I think from the get-go, and at least the sort of the rhetoric and the messages we'd been hearing over the previous 12 months in the run-up to sort of the end of the Brexit transition period, was that financial services shouldn't expect anything, that, it was sort of made very clear relatively early on that there wasn't going to be a level of agreement between the UK and Europe on that. So I guess over the last sort of 12 to 24 months, a number of firms, whether that's the large global institutions or UK startups, fintechs, who are trading in Europe or have customers in Europe, have been making arrangements to set up entities in Europe in order to be able to continue trading in those countries once the transition period ended. So we know a number of fintechs have been looking to set up entities and get licenses to continue delivering services in places like Dublin, for example, or Amsterdam or Lisbon, Krakow, etc. So wherever your flavour in terms of Europe is, that's where you were trying to set up your entity. So I think it's almost like if you start from that basis of financial services never expected anything, it's then really interesting to hear that now there is an impetus or a momentum, I guess, off the back of the actual, there's the first initial deal being agreed, that there are some areas that the UK and the EU have committed to continue talking about. And obviously this is one of them. And this memorandum of understanding that we expect to sort of be discussed between the two over the next couple of months will, I guess, be the first stage in an ongoing dialogue with Europe. So the memorandum will help Europe and the UK to share intelligence and insight on regulation and maybe try to come towards some sort of common agreement as to what that could look like, with the understanding that in the future there could be some talks that could lead to an equivalence deal, which is essentially what the financial services sector is looking for in the longer term.
Mm. And so why do you think that there wasn't any mention or no detailed mention of this in Boris Johnson's Brexit deal? Is it just the level of complexity? I mean, it seems kind of crazy to me that we didn't really think about it in detail, given that it's our largest export, really.
Yeah, it's a sort of a common joke within our team at Innovate Finance that fish and prawns are the markets and the sectors that get a lot of resources thrown at them, because maybe you can envisage or you can see how Europe or how the UK could take back control of our waters physically, whereas financial services, fintech, is by nature a very global sector. So actually, I think it's London is a preeminent financial services centre, but perhaps less easy for people to sort of imagine or see or have ownership of our financial services in a way that you want to push it forward. I mean, as I said, I think there was a sort of, from the get-go, there were low expectations as to what would happen, and I imagine that as the clock was ticking down in terms of getting towards the end of the transition period, an element of prioritization came into play, and as a result, obviously, financial services was already sort of very well aware that because of the technicality of what would need to be agreed, that it wasn't going to be something that would crop up in this initial round of talks. But as I said, I think it's good that there is still that openness to have that dialogue in the coming months and hopefully years as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting about the negotiations as well between the UK and Europe. I'm sort of wondering what's at stake, really, because I think if the likelihood is that we'll just have some kind of parity with what we currently have, what's all the fuss about? What's at stake?
So I guess at the moment there's a sort of a tricky situation in that, yes, a lot of firms, a lot of entities have gone out and made their contingency plans. But actually, I think, overall and in the longer term, there is an impact on UK PLC as to not having an agreement that allows that sort of frictionless trade in services between us and our nearest sort of trading partner. It's a fintech founder explained it to me in a really interesting way, not before Christmas, in that, it's great. We've got sovereignty over 70 million odd people in the UK. And what that means in terms of our regulation of financial services is really interesting. And we know that it's something the government is very keen to get more ideas from business about, because now that we have control over our own financial services regulation, so to speak. Equally, we're losing access to 200 million odd adults, consumers across the way. And ordinarily, other firms who are perhaps coming into, wanting to expand into Europe from outside, so from Asia and from the States, would have used London as a jumping off point to do that. So are they going to do that now? Loads of firms, we've seen it not just in financial services, in tech and other places, have been really, made strong commitments to continue to develop their London bases. But as things continue, and I think it's why momentum now is important to keep that goodwill going, but you will start to see that erosion over time. And so there is a need for London, the UK, to really think about its place in the world outside of Europe, and where we can continue to sort of foster innovation and competition in line and in step with our neighbours in Europe, but equally sort of, I guess, maybe take some of the benefits of being outside of that regime if we can do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've heard quite a few times with some of our, consulting clients and various colleagues around the world about this idea of the UK being a bit of a springboard to the rest of the world. So yeah, I think, we've got close ties with Asia and geographically with Europe, but we've got to sort of remain friends so that frostiness doesn't erode other opportunities around the world. So I've got a question here from Tuck Merv. I apologise if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but he says, interesting talk. I wonder what will happen to the financial services in the UK. Do you think that they might lose their power and influence? So that kind of goes to what you were saying before.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's I think it's services in general. I sort of come from the legal services world, and one of the things when the Brexit vote first happened, one of the issues that we were hearing from law firms was that, actually, if you've got a global law firm with offices in London, but equally in Paris, in Frankfurt, in other parts of Europe, that they're just starting to leave us out of the conversation a little bit more. It's almost like they've already said goodbye to us. And certainly that element of influence that the UK has is diminished in some capacity. One of the things that I'll always be a little bit annoyed about during the Brexit vote was sort of this understanding that we were going to be removing the shackles of European rule. And actually, the UK was probably one of the most influential, if not the most influential partner in the Europe project in terms of regulation and legislation. So actually, a lot of the stuff that was being put forward that came out of Europe was very much shaped by and pushed by us. And I think that definitely reads across to financial services, in that it's that having that seat at the table. I mean, that being said, like I said, there's always an opportunity in everything, and we know that the government is really keen to hear from businesses, from innovative firms, to understand how we can continue to sort of push that message of, right, the UK is out here to do business, we're out here to sell, we're out here to strike trade deals, and we're out here to leverage our financial services, our tech sectors, and really sort of make a go of things, sort of standing on our own 2 feet. So there are opportunities, and I think even in financial services, there are probably bits of regulation that came down from Europe that don't quite work for where we're going. One of the common things that we hear is, around the open banking regime, 90-day reauthentication for access to third-party providers. A real headache for me to open my banking app and have to say yes every 3 months to allow all of my other fintechs to plug in and help me to manage my money. That sort of stuff we can look at again now that we're out of the European regime, and that might mean that we're able to sort of capitalise on and move ahead in certain areas of innovation in a way that it might take Europe a little bit longer to reach us.
Yeah. So really interesting insights. In terms of opportunities, I'm just trying to think about in the Brexit negotiation, at least how it was painted in the media, there seemed to be some strong arming on both sides. And I'm sort of wondering what the benefit for the EU would be to continue to work amicably with the UK in terms of access to their financial markets. I mean, given that we are so strong in that segment and we do have so many fintech companies based here, and even the banking sector here is really strong, it does on the surface seem to make sense that they would roll over and just say, okay, well, we'll just carry on as we did before. But do you think there's any risk? Do you think that is generally what's agreeable on both sides?
I think there's as I said, I think fintech especially is a global business, doesn't really like borders, so to speak. And actually, as you said, we are preeminent in what we do, in terms of Europe and where we are in terms of innovation. In many areas, we're miles ahead, both in customer adoption and innovation. And actually, it makes sense for European players to be able to access that and to draw on that, to help sort of manage, and advance their own business areas. So I'd like to think that there is a mutual, and this is why these discussions are taking place. But there's mutual benefit in Europe also having access to the London market and our thriving ecosystem of dynamism and innovation and growth. But under no illusions that obviously there are opportunities for other parts of Europe who are also working on developing those sorts of hubs, I guess, of energy and growth, to sort of see if they can take our lunch, so to speak. I don't think they will, but they'll probably try, and they throw a lot of resources at trying to do so.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of friction, if we were to not get a deal for financial services, or it was a less equitable deal, what are the types of things that businesses might feel? Where might our pain points be?
So I think there's definitely, obviously, the sense of, in terms of equivalence, and that being a key thing that the sector is looking for. Without that understanding that we hope we can get to in the future, it just adds more red tape to what you want to do. You have to deal with a regulatory regime and different regulatory markets across Europe, a very sort of piecemeal way. As well as that, we know that Europe has put forward a very comprehensive plan on digital finance that they put out sort of autumn last year, as to what they want to do in terms of developing a single market for payments, look at sort of, bringing more open finance. They've got a lot of stuff happening around operational resilience, cryptocurrency. So all of that stuff is going to be sort of happening over there. And meanwhile, the UK is also going to be sort of developing its own thought leadership and regulation and regulatory framework around that. And if you're a business that wants to operate in both, then you've got to then, throw resources at both. Whereas, last year or the year before, that wouldn't necessarily have been the case. You'd have felt like both were on the same track. So I think there's definitely sort of the regulatory challenges are key, and how that impacts on things like cross-border trade. Obviously, there is the more practical element of sort of actually flying into Europe and doing business and leaving. And we know that there are some exemptions and sort of, I guess, smart ways to do things around visas, etc. But I think that the reality is that it will become that much harder, whereas before it would be very easy to hop on a train or a plane and go and work or contract even in Europe for a bit of time. There's more red tape around that. I'm sure if you look at it from the goods perspective, I think Ireland particularly is suffering from access to Percy pigs, is what I read last week. So there is that, we're already starting to see that friction in goods. And I imagine that at the moment we're not seeing it because no one can travel, right? COVID is putting paid to that. And maybe, some of that will be mitigated by the changes in the way that we work anyway. But I think in a longer term, being able to sort of treat the European market, I guess, as an extension of what we're doing in the UK, won't be able to happen as organically, and that's just going to add in more sort of resources and friction in the bottom line to many firms.
Yeah, so before the show, we were talking about maybe some differences between larger organisations and smaller outfits, and I guess an arbitrage, if you like, in the amount of pain that one might feel, or opportunity. So you mentioned before about larger firms potentially would have offices overseas already, and they might have a licensed entity overseas. So it seems like, on the surface anyway, that larger firms probably have a solution in place anyway. And as you say, they weren't really expecting any kind of deal. But what about smaller outfits that are thinking that they might have, opened another office in Europe. Is it just the case that it will be more expensive and more difficult? Do you think that will make people think twice about branching out?
I think in the longer term, it will definitely impact where they branch out to. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of fintechs, as I come back to this point, would have seen the UK. UK is a great place to build your business, to start your business, full stop, and that will not change. But the UK is being a really good, opening point or gateway to the rest of Europe. Now, if you're a smaller firm and you want to sort of, trade in Europe, build services in Europe, have customers in Europe, you've now got to build into your big growth plan, and you've now got to make sure that you're building it into your discussions with investors about how you're building out a dual track to develop that across Europe. And as I said, with that understanding that actually there is a sort of a fragmented sort of view around regulation. Some of it is very Brussels heavy, but others are sort of based around national agreements within countries, and so it's just become that much more complicated and complex. So and what we've seen or what we've been speaking to the sector about is they might decide that it might be easier, and I'll throw in the fact that there are language barriers as well to deal with across Europe. It might be easier for you to think about, depending on what sort of business you have, expanding into different parts of the world, to Australia or Canada, for example, where you've got a singular regulatory regime, they speak the same language, and you might have access to the market in a different way. So it might change the plans, the longer term expansion plans of smaller firms going forward. But definitely, I think, they've got, in the same way that a large institution would have had to make sure that they have the right licenses and staff and legals all sorted for the end of the Brexit transition period, a fintech will have had to do the same. And they quite frankly wouldn't have had access to the same amount of resources whilst they're in their growth plan. So that is, it's an impact for sure.
Yeah, in the back of my mind, in terms of opportunity, I'm thinking about these larger firms that maybe have had the resources and have had like a robust plan and worked through all the wrinkles. I'm wondering if they could kind of commoditize that work, and then I guess we could open up those barriers to Europe with those firms, rather than through a collective policy or an agreement with Europe. I'm sure that people who work in fintech are solution finders, so I'm sure that they will find a way to make all of this work. So Dan Feehenny has got another question for you. He's saying, what do you think about the CMA regulating digital services and big tech, and the EU's Digital Services and Markets Act? That's definitely one for you, because I have no idea.
It's really interesting, and I think it's it's almost the elephant in the room, or the elephant in the Zoom, as I learned the other day. That's a very 2021 way of looking at things. Is the fact that actually, yes, Europe has taken quite a firm view and stance on how they want to manage and regulate big tech. And I guess from a financial services perspective, we know that there are big techs who are moving into financial services, whether that's the sort of the cloud provision that we see from a number of for a number of institutions that are relying on big tech services, or whether that's payments functions that sort of provide that interface between customers and their accounts and their banks. So there is a lot going on that at the moment doesn't quite sit or play within a regulatory perimeter, and Europe and the UK are looking at this very closely. Obviously, the CMA has put out, or at least has started to develop that thinking and that work around what digital markets, through their digital markets unit, what that could look like. And we know that the UK is thinking about developing those ideas. I guess at the moment, we haven't seen too much about how it would look, how it would apply to financial services. So obviously, I think, from what we've seen or what's come out publicly, it's very much focused on the big tech providers as platforms, and is this, the sort of the monopoly that they might have on information and on social media and platform hosting, so to speak. But that's not to say that in the future, as financial services progresses and there is more of, I like to call it a blending of the sort of the tech and the finance, in that maybe in 10 or 20 years time, we won't necessarily be differentiating between different providers. We'll just have an account and we just expect different bits to hang off it in a certain way, provided by different people in the value chain. Big tech is coming into more of that now. So I think we know that the EU are looking at this, about the wider big tech quite heavily, but there's definitely a financial services angle for us to consider in the UK, as well as what Europe is doing.
Yeah. And in terms of you touched on information, and we would.
Thanks. More than happy to answer my own question in the meantime.
So sorry. Yeah, just dropped off there. I apologise. Yeah, so I just had a question for you, Ayanna. I don't know if you heard any of it, but it was around data security, and it was about the March deadline, and whether you think that all of the questions around data sharing will be ironed out by the March deadline, or if you think that will take some time and have to be annexed for further discussion.
Yeah, I think that's an annex for further discussion point for sure. There was we at Innovate Finance spent a lot of time talking with European partners over the course of 2020, especially about the importance of making sure that data flows were maintained and that process could continue once the transition period had ended. And I think, obviously, from what we've seen in the agreement, there is at least that temporary understanding that will continue, with the idea that something more permanent will be built in the longer term. So I think it's probably quite a tall order for it to expect it all to be ironed out by March. But again, I think there's probably a lot of goodwill to make sure that something robust and sort of that works for both parties is developed over the coming months and hopefully years. And in the meantime, we've got, I guess, at least a temporary sort of regime that we can rely on, or that firms can rely on, so they continue to operate.
Great. And so the final question for me would be, do you think the UK financial services can be optimistic about times to come? There's been lots of bad news lately, but do you think there's going to be, some things to be hopeful and excited about?
I always think there is, at the end of the day, this, Brexit, COVID, as you say, some incredibly significant impacts on our financial services sector, but especially from a fintech perspective. As I said, our sector is innovative, we're dynamic, we can pivot. We saw a lot of it last year with people sort of building in new solutions and products for customers to help them, manage what was going on. I guess this period and this year will be a sense of review and renewal of what we want to do in the UK in terms of financial services. We have the Khalifa review into fintech that was due to sort of be published shortly, that we've been sort of very proud to support that. And that will come out with a series of recommendations to government as to how to really take our fintech sector forward. But, outside of that, there are also a number of reviews, elements, consultations looking at various different elements of our financial services system, from crypto to operational resilience to open banking, open finance. So there is a real, I think, moment here for the UK to think, well, right, so here we are. It's almost like day zero, so to speak. We've got a basis on which to build on. Where can we find the opportunities and the benefits, and really use the next couple of years perhaps to accelerate beyond a few of our neighbours in the world?
Absolutely. Well, there you go. Everyone listening, it's your responsibility to think up some amazing solutions and ideas for the future. Is there anything else that you think that we haven't touched on that you wanted to chat to me about?
No, absolutely not. No, I think it's been a great discussion, and obviously, again, I would encourage people to put themselves or their colleagues forward for the Women in FinTech Power List that closes this Friday.
Perfect. Okay, everybody, it's coming to the end of the show, so I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much, Ayanna, for joining me. Can you tell us where people can find out more about you, please?
You can find me on Twitter, Ayanna, IANA_VVEE. I'm also on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And I know that Hannah will also post some of your links in the comments section as well. All right, thanks for joining, everybody. To make sure you don't miss out, follow 11FS on LinkedIn and Twitter, and have a great day. Goodbye.